Now, what we haven't really discussed, John, is its impact on our legal system, which has been extraordinary. Now, I know it's a tax document, but it also sets some precedences on liberty and correct judgments, including a person has a right to be judged by their peer. They can't have arbitrary punishments placed upon them, and the punishment has to be roughly accurate to what their crime was, because in medieval England, you could end up in some pretty nasty scenarios if you weren't careful. Now, I'm a little bit concerned because the state of our current legal system is leaning a little bit toward the whole witch-burning, trial by media kind of idea. And even if you do get a jury, when you've got things like political cults taking over the ideology of a country, well, how do you get a fair jury out of your peers when they're judging you based on ideology, not what you've actually done? What lessons can we take and what should we be remembering from the Magna Carta that perhaps we are in danger of losing out of our legal system?
Well, there's a number of things. So, for example, Chapter 13, one of the key chapters and other chapters talks about the process of punishment. So the idea is that your charges must be known, that they must be understood, and also that there is a process. One of the things that happens today is whether you haven't paid a debt to the Australian Taxation Office, or whether it's a parking fine, or whether it's something more substantial than that, the process is the punishment. We have in modern times developed a whole system of opaque processes whereby, as we found out in recent years, for example, the Human Rights Commission might be investigating you for breaching the Human Rights Act, and you might not even know about it. Increasingly, people are having charges levied against them, and they don't know who's levied the charge, and they don't know precisely what the charge is. So this idea, 800 years old, going back to the Magna Carta, that if a charge is brought against you by the state, you are entitled to know what it is, you are entitled to know the process, and then you are entitled to a trial, as you say, of your peers. And then finally, if you are to be found guilty or convicted, that the crime is punished proportionately. So one of the things that governments around the world have been doing is imposing vastly disproportionate punishments on relatively minor offences. And that was talked about 800 years ago, but we haven't learned the lesson from 8 centuries ago. We are still allowing governments to do this to us.
Well, no, I mean, if you're a conservative commenter, you're basically going to get hounded by the press, by the government authorities, by the human rights commissions who seem to have no interest in actual hate speech when it's on the street. These things are now being used as a way to subvert our justice system, and it's quite worrying to see that we're going backwards as a civilization, not forwards. Now, I just wanted to put this quote out here from Henry III, who signed a revised copy of Magna Carta, because I think the language here is beautiful and people won't be used to hearing this. He said, and I quote, "Now that we, out of reverence for God and for the salvation of our soul and the souls of our ancestors and successors, for the exaltation of the Holy Church and the reform of our realm, have our own spontaneous goodwill given and granted to the archbishops, bishops, abbots, priors, earls, barons, and all the realm, these liberties written below to be held in the kingdom of England forever. In return for this grant and gift these liberties of other liberties, etc., they have given us the 15th part of all their movables." In other words, we understand that in taking tax, we are giving liberties, and this will be done forever and in honour of our ancestors, etc. Now, that reverence for the past and consideration of the future, I feel is something that maybe we have lost. But of course, England didn't become a utopia. You know, the realms of the West are still fighting continuously. But I have to say, do you think that because of things like the Magna Carta and the way that we evolve rather than revolt against our system, that our system has weathered the storm of civilization better than most?
Well, I think it has, but I think we also have to understand that it is so easy to take our rights for granted. Ronald Reagan famously said every generation must find its own freedoms and fight for those freedoms. I think that in recent times, in my living memory, freedom of speech has never been under such an assault as it is now. freedom of thought here in Australia. I went through the arguments against Julia Gillard's attempts to censor the media some 15 years ago. No sooner had we thought that those efforts had been defeated than a decade later you have a coalition government basically proposing something very similar. I think one of the lessons from the Magna Carta, one of the lessons from the human history of the West is that our freedoms are never secure. And I think what the left understands better than the centre-right or better than Liberals or better than Conservatives is that it is a constant power struggle that we are engaged in, and those on the right and centre-right tend to think that battles once fought, once won, are permanently won. That is not the case at all. And I think it's only when we're being challenged, as we are now are being challenged, that we understand we must gird our loins again for the battle, because these conflicts never